Hi everyone. Today's lesson is on making connections, which is a during reading strategy. The I can statement for today's lesson is I can make connections to text I am reading. And there are a variety of connections that you as a reader can make to the text. So this during reading strategy can be used for both informational text, again, so for core area courses such as social studies or science, or for literature such as novels or short stories or even poetry. You can make connections before, during, and after reading text. The importance of this during reading strategies, like other strategies, is that it increases your reading comprehension. It also requires you to draw upon your prior knowledge or background knowledge of a topic, as well as your own personal experiences. So this is kind of a fun during reading strategy because it's really all about your own personal life and the knowledge that you have learned through your years of existence. So for making connections to work as a during reading strategy, you have to use what you already know to help you understand something new. Okay, there are three major types of connections that you can make with text. One is text to world connection. This is when you are connecting the story to history or other events that are going around worldwide. The second type of connection that you can make with text is called text to text. This is when you connect characters or the setting or event from one story to another story. And the third one is text to self connections, where you connect the story to your own personal life. We're going to look at text to self connections first. This is the easier of the type of connections that you can make because it really has to do with you personally. So again, text to self connection is making a connection between your own personal life and the short story or novel or informational text that you are reading. There are a variety of questions that you can ask yourself for text to self connections. These questions include asking yourself, what does this story remind me of? Can I relate to the characters in the story? And does anything in this story remind me of my own life? The next type of connection is text-to-text connections. This is when you make a connection between what you're reading and something that you have already read previously. Again, there are different types of questions that you can ask yourself to help you make a text-to-text connection. One of the questions that you can ask yourself is, does anything in this story remind me of another story I've read? How is this text similar to other things I have read? Or how is this text different from other things I have read? So if we were reading poetry, we could compare poetry. Maybe you've read poetry before. Maybe you're not a big fan of poetry, so your exposure to poetry is very limited. So you want to think about, how does poetry differ from, say, a short story or a novel or even a magazine? The third type of connection that you can make is called text-to-world connections. And this is when you, as the reader, make a connection between what you're reading and what's gone on in the world. It can be from history or it can be present tense. Again, some guiding questions to ask yourself in order to help you make text-to-world connections are, what does this remind me of in the real world? How are events in this story similar to things that happened in the real world? Or how are things in this story, such as events, different from things that have happened in the real world. So again, if you were reading about, I believe there's a book called Fever, and it's about yellow fever. And that's kind of like a scientific anomaly where people were plagued with this illness that they didn't know about. You could make a text to world connection reading fever to today's COVID-19. When you are writing about a type of connection that you have made with the text that you are reading, you need to use textual evidence from the story. It doesn't matter if it's informational text or a novel or a short story or a magazine article or a newspaper article. You need to have quotations from the text that support the type of connection that you are trying to make with what you're reading. It's very, very important for you to always use quotation marks when you are copying directly from a book or a magazine or a newspaper article. And you also need to cite the page number. So we will work on those continuously all this year. This is extremely important so that you don't end up plagiarizing information that wasn't yours. So when citing textual evidence, you should remember to use the author's exact words. You want to copy word for word. However, that's why you use quotation marks, both at the beginning and at the end of the quote. You also need to tell where you found it. Technically, when we're in English class, I know which short story or novel we're talking about, so you don't have to write the author, comma, and then the page number. You just have to put parentheses around the page number. And again, like I said, we will be practicing that a lot. Some ways of introducing text are to use these sentence starters. One thing that I've noticed through the years is that students are awesome at finding textual evidence in the form of quotes to support what they're saying. However, they just slap down the quote. There's no introduction to it. And that really makes the reading of your response very jagged. So I know Mr. Carestia, and I'm sure some other teachers have always tried to help you do this, but this is a real focus for this year, no matter whether we're writing a journal entry or a thesis, your iSearch project, whatever we're writing. And when you're using textual evidence, you really need to use these types of sentence structures. For example, according to the text, comma, or I love this one because you don't even have to use the page number at the end. On page 5, the author stated, then you have comma with your quote. Another sentence starter is, the author wrote, comma, then your quotations. As the author mentioned on page 5, again, with this sentence starter, you don't have to include the parentheses with the page number at the end of the quote. In the first paragraph, the author wrote, or another sentence starter for citing evidence is, one example of this in the text is, and then you would have your quotation. So again, it's really important after you make a connection with the text, whether it's text to self, text to text, or text to world, that you find textual evidence to support that connection that you're making. And you use textual evidence not just by throwing it down on the paper, but by introducing it and then explaining how that helped you form a connection to the text you're reading.